Dr. Jikara had been reviewing experimental failure submissions for the Universal Science Networks for 43 years. In all that time, she had never encountered anything quite like the human file that appeared in her inbox on a routine morning. The Galactic Scientific Consortium had a long tradition of broadcasting educational content about failed experiments. It was considered a public service. When the Etherac accidentally collapsed a space station during a gravity manipulation test 200 years ago, the footage became mandatory viewing for every physics student in the galaxy. When the crystalline Shuveen tried to create artificial suns and instead generated a 3-day blackout across 12 systems, the network created a 4-part documentary series. Failure was educational, after all, and the great civilizations of the galaxy learned from their rare mistakes. The humans had joined the VN Consortium only 5 years ago, and this was their first submission to the failure archive. Dr. Z. Okara expected something modest. Perhaps a minor calculation error. Maybe a small laboratory accident. The file was labeled Recent Educational Failures. Last Tuesday. She opened it. Her 4-eye stalks drew back in surprise. The file was 8,000 terabytes. Dr. Z. Okara immediately called an emergency meeting of the review board. Surely this was a mistake. No civilization could produce 8,000 terabytes of failure data in a single day. The file size alone suggested either a transmission error or perhaps humans had submitted their entire archive by accident. The review board assembled in the main viewing chamber. 12 species were represented, each one a pinnacle of scientific achievement in the galaxy. There was Councillor Drex of the Dren, whose people took an average of 17 years to approve a single experiment. There was Ambassador Plex, whose civilization hadn't had a laboratory accident in 3 millennia. There was the floating consciousness of Scientist Vorth, whose people existed in a state of pure thought and rarely made mistakes because they could simulate every outcome. Before acting, Dr. Z. Okara activated the first file. The screen showed a human research facility. It looked remarkably chaotic. Equipment was scattered across workbenches. Humans rushed from place to place with an energy that made the Dren Counselor visibly uncomfortable. One human was drinking a brown liquid from a container while simultaneously welding something that sparked violently. This is their main research station, Dr. Z. Okara explained, reading from the file notes. They call it totally safe experiments, probably. Probably? Councillor Drex's voice was strained. What kind of research designation includes the word probably? The first video began playing. A team of humans had apparently decided to test whether attaching chemical rockets to a wheeled chair would create an efficient personal transportation device. Dr. Z. Okara watched as the human strapped themselves into the chair, ignited the rockets, and immediately shot across the facility at tremendous speed before crashing through 3 walls and landing in what appeared to be a water storage tank. The humans rushed to help their colleague out of the water. The colleague was laughing. Actually laughing. Then they walked back to the chair and began making adjustments while saying something the translator rendered as, "Okay, so we need better steering." The review board sat in stunned silence. Then Councillor Drex spoke. Did they just try again? Immediately? Without filing an incident report? Without a safety review? Without a 17-year study period to determine what went wrong? Dr. Z. Okara advanced to the next file. This one showed humans attempting to create what they called a more efficient explosive compound for mining operations. The experiment produced an explosion roughly 6 times more powerful than intended. It shattered every window in the facility and triggered the emergency alarms. The humans documented everything methodically: blast radius, structural damage, chemical composition analysis. Then, while repair crews were still fixing the windows, Dr. Z. Sekura watched the same team begin working on what they called Explosion version 2. "Stop," Ambassador Plex said quietly. "Just stop for a moment. Are we to understand that humans experience this many failures in a single day?" Dr. Z. Akakara checked the file index. According to the submission notes, Tuesday was, and I quote, "a pretty average day. Maybe a bit slow, actually." She continued playing files. The review board watched humans strap rockets to increasingly improbable objects: furniture, food containers, a musical instrument called a piano. They watched a biology team accidentally create bacteria that made everything smell like a human fruit called strawberries for 3 months. They watched engineers test a definitely safe reactor design that melted through 4 floors before the emergency containment activated. They watched chemists mix substances that every other species in the galaxy knew better than to combine, producing colors that several board members didn't have names for. But something else became apparent as they watched. Every single failure was documented with extraordinary precision. Multiple camera angles, detailed measurements, comprehensive notes on what went wrong and why. The humans didn't just fail randomly. They failed systematically. They failed with purpose. And most disturbing of all, they seemed to fail with enthusiasm. In one video, a human researcher stood in front of the camera, holding up a twisted piece of metal that had apparently been a ballista. Prototype engine before it experienced rapid unplanned disassembly, which Dr. Zihachora understood to be human terminology for exploded. The researcher grinned at the camera and said, "Well, we definitely learned what doesn't work. Time to try something new." Scientist Voth's floating consciousness pulsed with confusion. I do not understand their psychology. They appear to be enjoying the failures. Where is the shame? The embarrassment? The lengthy reflection period? "There's more," Dr. Giera said. She opened a different folder labeled "Hold My Beer Experiments." "What is a beer?" Counselor Drex asked. "According to the database, it's a mild intoxicant humans consume socially." The phrase "hold my beer" appears to be a signal that a human is about to attempt something inadvisable. The videos in this folder were even more alarming. They showed humans performing experiments based on what the notes described as peer pressure, and someone saying we couldn't do it, so obviously we had to try. One experiment involved seeing if they could make a vehicle travel underwater. It didn't work, but the humans seemed delighted by the failure and immediately began planning submarine car. Version 2. The review board watched for 6 hours straight. They saw explosions, collapses, fires, chemical spills, robots that went haywire, AI programs that developed unexpected personalities, physics experiments that violated what everyone thought were natural laws, and in one memorable case, an attempt to genetically modify plants that resulted in pumpkins growing to the size of small houses. When the viewing finally ended, the chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Ambassador Plex spoke. "We cannot broadcast this." "Why not?" asked Scientist Vorth. "Because it's horrifying. It's reckless. It's dangerous. It shows a complete disregard for proper scientific protocol. Young scientists across the galaxy might see this and think such behavior is acceptable." "Counterpoint," said a voice from the back. It was Dr. Sun Nal, a young Shveen crystalline who'd only recently joined the review board. "We have been broadcasting failures for 847 cycles. In that time, we have shown 17 major incidents across the entire consortium. The humans have provided us with 247 failures from a single day, each one meticulously documented and analyzed. The educational value is unprecedented." "The educational value is that this is what not to do," Counselor Drex said firmly. "Is it though?" Dr. S. N.L.'s crystal structure flickered with light. I noticed something while watching. Every human failure led to a new attempt. Every explosion taught them something. By the end of each video sequence, they were closer to success than when they started. They're not failing because they're incompetent. They're failing because they're trying things no one else dares to attempt. Dr. Ziyakaziya reviewed her notes. The submission includes their success rate data. According to human records, approximately 30% of their experimental attempts succeed on the first try. 50% succeed within 5 attempts. The remaining 20% either eventually succeed or teach them enough that they abandon the approach and try something entirely different. 30% on the first try? Ambassador Plex sounded shocked. Our success rate on the first attempt is 97%. Yes, Dr. Genel said quietly. But how many things do we never attempt because we cannot guarantee success? When was the last time any of our civilizations tried something with only a 30% chance of working? The review board fell silent again. Finally, Dr. Ziyakara called for a vote. Should they broadcast the human failures on the Universal Science Networks? The vote was unanimous. Yes, they would create a special series, 10 episodes, showcasing what they were already calling humanity's greatest hits and misses. As the board members filed out of the chamber, Councilor Drex paused at the door. I still think this is going to be a disaster. Dr. Z, Akakara, adjusted her eye stalks to look at him. Counselor, I've just spent 6 hours watching humans turn disasters into learning opportunities. Perhaps disaster isn't what we should be worried about. Then what should we be worried about? That we might have to admit they're onto something. The first episode of Humanity's Greatest Hits and Misses aired on a Thursday evening, broadcast simultaneously across 47,000 systems. Dr. Z, Sakara, stood in the network's main control room, watching the viewership numbers with growing disbelief. Within the first hour, the broadcast had attracted more viewers than any science program in network history. Within 2 hours, it had surpassed the viewership of entertainment programs. By the end of the first episode, the Universal Science Networks servers were struggling to handle the traffic as species across the galaxy tuned in to watch humans do what everyone else considered unthinkable. The episode had focused on what humans called velocity experiments, which apparently meant making things go really fast and seeing what happens. Dr. Giara had watched the footage dozens of times while preparing the broadcast, but it still made her uncomfortable. Humans strapping themselves into vehicles and accelerating to ridiculous speeds. Humans building rockets with inadequate calculations and riding them anyway. Humans creating what they called land speed records by attempting to go faster than anyone had gone before, frequently crashing and then immediately building something even faster. The control room's communication board lit up with incoming messages. Dr. Ziyachara began reading them aloud to her staff. Message from the Dren homeworld. Absolutely horrified. Cannot stop watching. When is episode 2? Message from a Plexian University. This violates every safety protocol we teach. We've assigned it as mandatory viewing for all engineering students. Message from the Shavine crystal clusters. Our youth are now asking why we don't try more experiments. We blame you for this. Dr. Z. Hichikara's assistant, a young Itharak named Presh, looked up from his console. Doctor, we're receiving unprecedented submissions to the failure archive. 37 different species have sent experimental failure data in the last 3 hours alone. Previous record for a single day was 4 submissions. What kind of experiments? All kinds. It seems watching humans has inspired scientists across the galaxy to admit to failures they previously kept quiet. There's a Dren research team that's been trying to develop faster-than-light communication for 6 years. They just submitted documentation of 212 failed attempts. The submission note says, If humans can share their failures, so can we. Episode 2 aired the following week. This one focused on what Dr. Jikura had titled Collaborative Chaos, the Science of Peer Pressure. It showcased human experiments that began with phrases like, "Hold my beer," "Watch this," and "Hey, do you think we could?" The episode included the famous submarine car attempt, several experiments involving homemade aircraft that should never have left the ground, and a memorable sequence where humans tried to break what they called the world's longest distance for projectile furniture. The viewership was even higher than the first episode. But something else was happening. Young scientists across the galaxy were starting to change their approach to research. Dr. Ziyao received a visit from Counselor Drex 3 weeks into the broadcast schedule. The Dren official looked tired, which was unusual for a species that rarely showed stress. "We need to talk about what your program is doing to galactic science," he said without preamble. Dr. Zihakara gestured for him to sit. "I assume you're referring to the increased experimental activity?" "Increased?" Counselor Drex's voice rose slightly. "Doctor, our research oversight committee has been flooded with experimental proposals in the last month. More than we usually receive in a decade. Worse, they're all using this new phrase, rapid prototyping. Do you know what that means? It's a human term. It means building and testing quickly rather than spending years in the planning phase. Yes, and our young scientists want to do it. They want to reduce the approval process from 17 years to 6 months. 6 months. Do you understand what will happen if we allow that? Progress?" Dr. Z. Sakura suggested mildly. Counselor Drex stood abruptly. "Chaos, disorder, accidents. We've maintained a perfect safety record for 300 years. Now I have students telling me that safety is less important than learning. That failure is educational. They're quoting humans at me, Doctor. Humans." After he left, Presh came into Dr. Zihakara's office holding a datapad. "Doctor, you should see this. A group of Shveen Crystal youth has submitted a video to the network. They're calling it Our First Failure, a Shveen experiment in the human style." Dr. Zihakar played the video. A cluster of young Shveen, their crystalline bodies glowing with excitement, had attempted to develop a new harmonic frequency that could improve power generation. The experiment failed spectacularly, shattering 17 crystal structures and triggering a resonance cascade that disrupted communications for 3 hours. But the video showed something remarkable. The young Shveen had documented everything. They analyzed what went wrong. They discussed what they learned. And at the end, one of them said in perfect galactic standard, "We will try again with modifications." This is the way. "This is the way" is a human phrase, Presh noted. It's becoming popular among young researchers. It means continuing despite failure. Over the following weeks, the transformation accelerated. The Universal Science Networks began receiving submission after submission from species that had rarely shared failures before. A Etherak research station documented their attempt to create artificial gravity generators, which instead created localized zero-gravity fields that sent equipment floating around the station for 6 hours. A Plexian team admitted they'd been secretly working on advanced propulsion systems, failing repeatedly, but learning from each failure. Episode 5 aired 2 months into the series. Dr. Jikura had titled it, "We Fixed the Glitch: How Human Solutions Create New Problems That Lead to Better Solutions." This one showcased the human tendency to solve problems in ways that created additional problems, which they then solved with even more creative solutions, eventually arriving at innovations nobody had expected. One sequence showed a human team trying to develop better radiation shielding for spacecraft. Their first attempt blocked radiation, but also blocked all other signals, making communication impossible. Their second attempt allowed communication, but made the shielding too heavy. Their third attempt made it light but structurally weak. Their fourth attempt was too expensive to manufacture. Each failure taught them something, and by attempt 17, they'd created a shielding system that was better than anything currently in use by the consortium. The episode ended with a human researcher named Dr. Martinez speaking directly to the camera. People ask us why we don't give up after the first few failures. We tell them, every failure eliminates one wrong answer. If there are 1,000 wrong ways to do something and only one right way, we'll happily fail 999 times because we know we're getting closer with each attempt. That quote became famous across the galaxy almost overnight. Dr. Z. Hachikura saw it translated into 400 languages. She saw it carved into crystal structures by the Shavin. She saw it incorporated into Dren educational materials. She saw Plexian students wearing clothing with the words printed on them. 3 months into the broadcast, Dr. Z. Hachikura received an urgent summons to the Galactic Scientific Consortium headquarters. She arrived to find the main chamber filled with senior officials from across the galaxy, and none of them looked happy. The consortium chair, an ancient Itharak named Elder Vihesh, addressed her directly. Dr. Z. Hachikura, this chamber has received 4,000 formal complaints about your broadcast program. Species representatives claim you are encouraging reckless behavior, undermining established safety protocols, and corrupting young scientists with human philosophy. Dr. Hachikura remained calm. I understand the concerns, Elder. However, I should point out that since the broadcast began, the consortium has recorded more successful innovations than in the previous decade combined. 17 new technologies have been developed. 43 long-stalled research projects have made breakthroughs. 89 new collaborative research initiatives have been formed across species lines. That's not the point, another counselor interjected. The point is that young scientists are taking unnecessary risks. Are they? Dr. Z. Hachikura pulled up a holographic display. I've analyzed the incident reports. Yes, there are more experimental failures being reported now, but the severity of incidents hasn't increased. In fact, it's decreased slightly. Do you know why? Because the young scientists are following the human example of proper documentation and safety analysis. They're failing in controlled ways. They're learning systematically. Elder Vihesh studied the data. Nevertheless, the complaints must be addressed. May feel that humans are a negative influence on galactic scientific culture. Then perhaps, Dr. Jora said carefully, those complainants should look at the data another way. For centuries, we've maintained what we call high standards. But what if those standards weren't about excellence? What if they were about fear? Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of admitting we don't know everything. She changed the holographic display to show comparative data. Before humans joined the consortium, the average research project took 12 years from conception to completion. The average success rate was 95%, but we attempted an average of 400 major experiments per year across the entire consortium. 400 experiments among trillions of citizens. She highlighted different numbers. In the 3 months since the broadcast began, we've attempted over 2,000 experiments. Yes, the success rate has dropped to 70%. But we've learned more, created more, and advanced more in 3 months than in the previous 3 years. And all because humans taught us something we'd forgotten. What's that? Elder Vihesh asked. That science isn't about being right. It's about being curious enough to be wrong. The chamber fell silent. Finally, Elder Vihesh spoke. The broadcast will continue. However, we require additional episodes addressing safety protocols and proper failure analysis. Can you arrange this? I can do better than that, Dr. Hachikura said. Episode 7 is already prepared. It's called How Humans Stay Alive: Safety Through Understanding Risk. I think the consortium will find it very educational." She left the chamber and returned to the network offices, where Presh was waiting with news. "Doctor, you won't believe this. We just received a message from the Human Research Station. They want to host the season finale. They're inviting the entire review board to visit totally safe experiments, probably, and meet the scientists in person." Dr. Z. Hachikara felt all four of her eye stalks draw back in surprise. Then she began to plan. If the galaxy wanted to understand humans, perhaps it was time to meet them face to face. "Send a reply," she told Presh. "Tell them we accept. And tell them to prepare for visitors who are very, very nervous." Part 3. The transport carrying Dr. Z. Okasara and the review board members approached the Human Research Station 6 weeks later. Through the viewport, they could see the facility floating in orbit around a small moon. It looked improvised. Where most consortium stations were sleek and uniform, the human station appeared to be a collection of different modules attached to each other with creative engineering. One section looked brand new. Another section showed signs of being repaired multiple times. There was even a module that appeared to be held in place partially by what looked like reinforced tape. "That cannot possibly meet safety standards," Counselor Drex muttered. Their shuttle docked without incident, and the airlock opened to reveal a human woman in a white coat. She was young by human standards, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style and an easy smile that seemed permanently fixed on her face. "Welcome to totally safe experiments, probably," she said cheerfully. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, Head of Research Operations. We're thrilled to have you here. Please watch your step. We had a minor gravity fluctuation incident this morning, and some of the floor panels are still settling." The review board exchanged worried glances, but followed her into the station. What they saw inside was controlled chaos. Humans moved through corridors with purpose and energy, carrying equipment, discussing projects, occasionally laughing at something only they understood. Through windows and laboratory doors, they could see experiments in progress. Small explosions, bright flashes of light. In one lab, smoke was pouring out until a human activated a ventilation system and waved the smoke away. Casually, Dr. Chun led them to a large observation room overlooking the main research bay. The entire review board gathered at the window, watching dozens of experiments happening simultaneously below. "I know what you're thinking," Dr. Chen said, leaning against the window frame. "You're thinking this looks dangerous, disorganized, maybe even crazy." "The thought had occurred to us," Ambassador Plex admitted. Dr. Chen smiled. 5 years ago, when humanity first made contact with the consortium, we were overwhelmed. Every species we met was older than us, smarter than us, more advanced than us. The Itharak had been exploring space for 10,000 years before we figured out how to leave our own planet. The Dren had perfected technologies we hadn't even dreamed of. The Shreen existed in ways we couldn't fully comprehend. She turned to face them directly. We realized we couldn't compete on the same level. We didn't have millennia of accumulated knowledge. We didn't have the patience of species who live for centuries. We didn't have the luxury of taking 17 years to approve an experiment. What we had was limited time and unlimited curiosity. Dr. Z. Hachikara's eye stalks focused intently on the human. "So you chose to fail quickly rather than succeed slowly?" "Not exactly," Dr. Chun said. "We chose to try quickly. Failure is just a natural part of trying. Let me show you something." She led them to a private conference room and activated a holographic display. It showed an experiment from 40 years ago, long before humanity had joined the consortium. A team of human scientists had been attempting to create a stable wormhole generator for faster-than-light travel. The review board watched as the experiment went catastrophically wrong. The device exploded with tremendous force. A small moon near the research facility simply disintegrated, scattered into debris. The footage showed human ships evacuating in panic, alarms blaring, systems failing. This was humanity's most embarrassing scientific disaster, Dr. Chun said quietly. 314 people died. The project was shut down. The lead scientists were disgraced. For 5 years, nobody wanted to talk about it. She changed the display, but we documented everything. Every sensor reading, every calculation, every mistake. And we analyzed all of it. Not to assign blame, but to understand what happened. The new display showed pages of analysis, reports, simulations. Years of work studying the failure. What we learned from that disaster changed everything, Dr. Chun continued. We discovered that our understanding of space-time manipulation was fundamentally wrong. Not just slightly off, but completely backwards in some areas. We realized that what we thought was a containment failure was actually a breakthrough in understanding how space-time could be safely manipulated on a small scale. She brought up a new image. It showed a sleek device, compact and elegant. This is our current generation FTL drive enhancement module. It's based entirely on what we learned from that disaster. It improves efficiency by 40% over standard consortium drives. Last I checked, 17 species have adopted some version of this technology, including the Ethorok. Counselor Drex leaned forward. You're saying that disaster led to this? Not just that disaster. Every disaster, every failure, every explosion, collapse, and accident you've seen in our broadcasts. Dr. Chun pulled up more displays, each showing a catastrophic failure and the innovation that eventually resulted from it. The bacteria that made everything smell like strawberries? We learned how to modify microbial gene expression in ways we never imagined, which led to advances in medicine. The reactor that melted through 4 floors? We discovered a new state of matter that's now used in advanced manufacturing. The rockets strapped to furniture? Terrible idea for transportation, but excellent for testing rapid deployment rescue systems. Scientist Verth's consciousness pulsed with confusion. But the waste, the inefficiency. If you had simply calculated properly from the beginning, we would have never tried, Dr. Chun interrupted gently, because the calculations would have told us it was impossible. Most of our breakthroughs came from attempting things that shouldn't work. We fail because we try things others won't attempt. She walked to the window overlooking the research bay. Every species in the consortium is older than us, wiser than us, more advanced than us. The Ethorak perfect their calculations before attempting experiments. The Dren simulate every possibility before building. The Shveen achieve breakthroughs through patience and crystalline understanding. Dr. Chun turned back to face them. But here's what I've learned about wisdom and patience. They're wonderful qualities, but they can also be barriers. When you're wise enough to know all the ways something can go wrong, you might never try it. When you're patient enough to wait for perfect conditions, you might wait forever. When you're advanced enough to know the right way to do things, you might never explore the wrong ways that accidentally lead somewhere amazing. So you deliberately choose ignorance? Ambassador Plex asked, but their tone was curious rather than critical. No, we choose exploration over certainty. We choose attempting the impossible over perfecting the possible. We choose learning from failure over never failing at all. Dr. Ziakara stepped forward. Dr. Chun, I must ask a difficult question. How many humans have died in experimental accidents? The room fell silent. Dr. Chun's expression became serious. Too many. Every death is a tragedy. Every accident that harms someone is a failure of a different kind. But I'll tell you something about humans. We volunteer for this. Every person on this station knows the risks. We're not careless with lives. We're careful with purpose. She brought up another display. This one showed safety protocols, emergency systems, medical facilities. We prepare for failure. We build redundant safety systems. We train constantly for emergencies. We accept risk, but we manage it. The difference between us and other species isn't that we're reckless. It's that we've accepted that innovation requires risk, and we've chosen to face that risk with open eyes. Ambassador Plex gestured toward the research bay below. But your young scientists out there, they're attempting experiments that could fail. That could harm them. Yes, Dr. Chen agreed. And every single one of them has studied the failures that came before. They know what didn't work. They know why it didn't work. They know the risks they're taking. That's the point of documenting and sharing failures. Not to discourage people from trying, but to help them try smarter. She pulled up one final display. It showed a graph tracking innovations across the consortium over the past century. There was a steady, slow increase for decades. Then, 3 months ago, the line suddenly curved upward sharply. This is what's been happening since the broadcast started, Dr. Chan explained. Young scientists across the galaxy are attempting more experiments, sharing more failures, learning faster. The rate of innovation across the consortium has increased by 300% in 3 months. Not because everyone became human, but because they adopted one simple idea. It's okay to fail if you learn something. Councillor Drex stared at the graph for a long moment. Our oversight committee has been receiving thousands of experimental proposals. I came here hoping to convince you to stop encouraging this behavior. But now? Dr. Chun prompted. Now I think perhaps the Dren have been too careful, too slow. We've been so concerned with preventing failure that we've prevented progress. Dr. S.N. Nal, the young Schween crystalline who had been quiet throughout the tour, suddenly glowed brightly. Dr. Chun, would it be possible for some of us to stay here for a time? To observe your methods? To learn this approach? Dr. Chun's smile returned full force. We were hoping you'd ask. We've already prepared guest researcher positions. Stay as long as you like. Try some experiments. Fail spectacularly. Learn something amazing. The tour continued through the station. The review board visited laboratories where experiments were in progress. They met human researchers who spoke passionately about their work, their failures, their discoveries. They saw the memorial wall where humans honored those who had died in the pursuit of knowledge. They saw the success wall where breakthroughs were celebrated. And they saw the failure wall, which was 3 times larger than the success wall, covered in documentation of experiments that hadn't worked but had taught valuable lessons. As the day ended and the review board prepared to return to their shuttle, Dr. Chun led them past a small sign near the main airlock. It read, "Days since last incident, 0. Below it, someone had added in handwriting, "Days since last breakthrough, also 0. Is that updated daily?" Dr. Z. Sakura asked. Usually several times a day, Dr. Chun admitted. We fail often, but we also discover often. The two go together. Back on the shuttle, as they departed the human station, the review board sat in silence for a while. Finally, Elder Vaish, who had joined them for the final day of the tour, spoke. I have lived for 300 years, the elder said quietly. I have seen the rise and fall of civilizations. I have witnessed great discoveries and terrible mistakes. But I have never seen anything quite like what humanity represents. What do they represent? Councillor Drex asked. Hope, courage, the willingness to be wrong in pursuit of being right. For too long, the consortium has valued certainty over curiosity. We have created a civilization of experts who rarely make mistakes because they rarely take risks. Perhaps that is why our progress has been so slow. What are you suggesting, Elder? Dr. Z. Sakura asked. I'm suggesting that the universal science networks continue broadcasting humanity's failures. I'm suggesting we establish exchange programs where young scientists can study with humans. I'm suggesting we create a new division within the consortium dedicated to what humans call rapid experimentation. Elder Vihash paused. I'm suggesting we learn from the youngest, newest species in the galaxy, because they understand something we've forgotten. What's that? Ambassador Plex asked. That the greatest discovery isn't in succeeding perfectly. It's in daring to fail spectacularly enough to learn something no one else was brave enough to try. 2 weeks later, Dr. Jikura stood in the control room preparing to air the season finale. The episode featured the review board's visit to the human station and Dr. Chen's explanation of humanity's philosophy. The network had promoted it heavily, and early projections suggested it would break all previous viewership records. As the broadcast began, messages started flooding in from across the galaxy. But these weren't complaints. They were applications. Young scientists from dozens of species wanted to study with humans. Research stations wanted to adopt rapid experimentation protocols. Universities wanted to add failure analysis to their curriculums. Presh appeared at Dr. Z. Hakura's side holding a datapad. Doctor, you need to see this. The Galactic Scientific Consortium has just announced the formation of a new department, the Department of Experimental Courage. It will be headquartered at the Human Research Station. They're accepting applications for positions. Dr. Z. Hajakara checked the application numbers. Within the first hour, over 10,000 scientists had applied. The server handling applications crashed twice from the traffic. Doctor, Presh said hesitantly, do you think this will change things? Really change things? Dr. Z. Achara looked at the viewership numbers climbing steadily upward on her screens. She thought about young Shavine crystals attempting new harmonics. She thought about Dren students proposing experiments that would have been unthinkable a year ago. She thought about Plexian researchers admitting to failures they'd previously hidden. She thought about an entire galaxy slowly learning that failure wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace. I think, she said slowly, that humanity has taught us the most important lesson we've learned in 1,000 years. Not about physics or engineering or any specific technology. They've taught us about courage. The courage to try. The courage to fail. The courage to try again. The broadcast ended with a final message from Dr. Chun, speaking directly to the camera with that characteristic human smile. To everyone watching across the galaxy, don't be afraid to fail. Be afraid of never trying. The universe is full of wonders we haven't discovered yet, and the only way to find them is to attempt the impossible, fail spectacularly, learn something amazing, and keep going. That's not just the human way. It's the scientific way. It's the way forward. The screen faded to black, then displayed a simple message. Humanity. Now with more explosions, Season 2 begins next month. The Safety Committee filed their formal protest within minutes. But the pre-orders for Season 2 broke another record. And across the galaxy, young scientists were already planning their first experiments in the human style. The age of careful, cautious science wasn't over, but it now shared space with something new. The age of courageous curiosity. And the humans, with their explosions and failures and unstoppable enthusiasm, had sparked a revolution that would change the galaxy forever. In her office, Dr. Z. Hakura received one final message. It was from Dr. Chun at the Human Research Station. It contained just 3 words and an image. The words read, "We told you." The image showed the sign at the station's entrance. Someone had added a new line below the others. It read,